In this video, we're going to go over scripting a little bit more in depth, and specifically the differences between visual scripting and inspector scripting, like generic behavior, um, and text-based programming or scripting. So what I'm going to be looking at mostly is a lot of the correlations between them. Specifically, it's all the same. You're solving the same problems, and generic behavior itself is even done in script. You can go look at the script for generic behavior if you want in here. So there's scripts, and if I opened up generic behavior, you could see that all of this is the same on what's going on there. So it is all script under the hood, and so why are we use generic behavior, and we're giving you specifically generic behavior where you're at in this program, so that you can leap some of the syntax hurdles associated with scripting. Um, that's one of the things that really scares people, so we're going to get into that a little bit. We're going to look at examples of correlations, and then we're going to do Pong in script next to generic behavior. So as I showed you, it's all the same under the hood. Visual script and generic behavior is actually made with script, and it makes the same calls. It just allows you to get rid of some of the syntax errors. So that's syntax and the boogeyman. Um, what is what is syntax? I keep saying that word. So syntax is knowing what to put where, and basically speaking the language to do this. So it's weird that there's different rules. You need a semicolon at the end of any statement. If you misspell any variables or you misspell any functions, then it's not going to work for you. If you don't have the right case, if you capitalize something or don't capitalize something. And there's also formatting, like the order you put things in, parentheses, what do you put in the parentheses, brackets, all types of things like that. So these are just rules in a language you're going to have to learn. And don't get me wrong, generic behavior has its own learning curve and its own rules that you have to learn. But if you miss one of these, if you mess up something here, it's not that it just doesn't work. It stops you from moving forward at all until you fix that, which can be frustrating. So I'm going to show you a bunch of correlations between all of these things, like the start function, update, on collision enter. There's going to be if statements that we're going to look at, getting input, setting a variable, all the stuff that we're doing in generic behavior. I'm just going to show you in script compared to that. So we're going to do this in Pong. You should already have a Pong project up if you followed the tutorials up to this point. So I already had some of this done. I'm going to delete this actually and start from scratch so you can see it. So you should have started here with Pong if you did the tutorials up to this point or did the Pong assignment. And when I finished in those tutorials, I only had half. I have to turn this generic behavior back on because I turned it off. I only have half of this done, right? Only this paddle works. This paddle over here doesn't work. There's no score for this side. This goal doesn't work. And so I'm going to do the other half in script. I'm going to script the ball too, but I'm going to do the other half in script so I could show you the correlations between these. So I'm going to make a script folder for me, like down in the generic behavior. You can see that there's a script folder for all of its stuff, but I'm going to keep them separate. So I'm going to right click on my folder, and I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to name it scripts. And in here, I'm going to double click, and I'm going to create my first script, C# script. So create C# script, and I'm going to name it ball. And I'm going to double click it, and Visual Studio comes up for me. So you may be using Mono Develop, but this is Visual Studio, and I kind of like different formatting here. So if you look at this, it creates a C# class for us, and that class is named ball. It's inherited off of mono behavior, which a lot of your scripts are going to be, and you'll eventually get more into inheritance and what that means, but we don't need to worry about it right now. And you'll see that there's a start function and an update function. And if I look back at when we did this in generic behavior, we asked, if I did the ball, we said, when do we want the ball done to start moving? And we said, as soon as the game starts. This already exists in the world. As soon as the game starts, we want it to start moving. So we chose start. When we want this to happen, the event we want this to happen on was start. So those events are the same as these events in They're the same as these events right here, start and update. And update is available in your events here also. You can see updates down there. And so just to reiterate, start happens when this object starts. So if it already exists in the scene, as soon as you start the scene, if it's spawned or brought in, as soon as it's spawned and it starts updating. Start happens once, so it's like a old blunderbuss or something with one shell in it. Um, Happens once, never happens again as soon as it starts. Update actually happens like a machine gun. The entirety of the existence of this update will always be called over and over and over at 60 frames per second if you're running at 60 frames per second or whatever your frame rate is. Whatever speed your program is running at, update will be called that many times. So it's good for like checking, constantly checking something or doing something that needs to be done uh, over and over and over again. But so we have that in both script and generic behavior. We have these events, and we're going to look at some more events too. So when we asked what we wanted the ball to do, and we solved it in generic behavior, we said on start, we want to do something. We wanted to set the velocity of the ball, and we set it to 1, 1, 1 on the x, 1 on the y, with a speed of 1. So that's what we did there. And we're going to look at what that means in script here. So also we just to reiterate also we are using velocity. So to use velocity on an object, you need a rigid body because it doesn't understand the concept of velocity or physics-based forces unless it has a rigid body on it. So it has a rigid body. I already know it has a rigid body. So I'm going to go into script and say, what do I need? What did I need for this to happen in here? So I want to move the ball. And if you don't understand all of these things, that's okay. There's some concepts that you might not have got to in scripting yet, but just follow along. I want to be able to control how fast the ball goes. So I'm going to make a public float speed, and I'm going to set it to 1.0f right at the beginning. When I make this public, that means I'm going to be able to see this, and well, it means a couple things. Well, other scripts can actually access this, but also if I just make it public, it gets shown in the inspector. So if I go to put this on the ball, and I'm going to disable this generic behavior now again. And I have this new script that I put in here called ball. Make sure I save it. Control S, saved it. And I'm going to add this script to the ball. I have the ball selected. I'm going to add under scripts, and I should see ball, and I do right there. There's ball. And you can see the speed variable I made is right here, and it's set to what I set it to in there. So if I just want to move this, I'm going to do the same thing I did in the generic behavior. On start, I have to change the velocity of this object. And to do that, I need access to the rigid body. So every game object that you have it can access its own components. And you can get a game object that this script is on by just typing game object. It's lowercase game object. Uppercase is the variable type. So lowercase game object, it says, I already know if you want to access the game object this is attached to, go ahead. And I'm going to hit dot, and I'm going to say get component. And there's some weird syntax here, right, that I'm going to type in rigid body into these little carets right here, these angle. It's just the syntax for this. And then this is actually a function, so I'm going to put the function parentheses there. So what this did right here is it said, whatever game object I'm on, let me get another component that's on this game object. And the one I'm looking for is rigid body. So if I look back at my ball here, I could get any of these components on here. I could get the mesh if I wanted to. I could get the collider if I wanted to. I can get the transform, which you do quite often. I can get the transform off the get component, and it actually gives you transform for free. You don't have to use get component on it. But I wanted the rigid body because I want to change the velocity. So I know it has a rigid body, and I'm going in here and I said, get me a component that's on this game object, and I want the rigid body. So now I have access to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. So I'm going to into another variable. I'm going to make that private. Again, you don't have to completely worry about this, but I'm going to make a rigid body type variable. I'm going to call it RB. And this is just so I don't have to call this over and over and over again. It'd probably be good practice too, so maybe I will, but uh, I'm going to just get the rigid body component and save it into that variable. So a semicolon at the end there. I made a variable. It's private. I don't need to see it outside of here. Uh, and I set it to, I got the component that was on this object and set it to this. So um, I guess it's clearer if I do it the other way. So I don't save that, but I am going to do it the other way. So what I wanted to do is right when this started, I can say RB, which is my rigid body, because I just got my rigid body off of that, dot velocity, because I want to change the velocity of this object, just like I set the velocity in the generic behavior. And I need to set this to a vector. The vector I set it to in generic behavior was, if I pop this down again, I set it to 1 on the x, 1 on the y, 0 in the z, and the amount was 1. So my speed was 1 that I wanted for that. So I can make a new vector 3, and what I'm going to do here is 1 in the x, 1 in the y, and 0 in the z, right? And I'm not taking speed into account here right now. So after I set it to that, I can also I can set speed right in here if I wanted to for each of these things. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do RB velocity equals RB dot velocity times speed. And then I'm setting it, I'm actually scaling it by the speed of whatever this is. And so this right here, this script, is exactly what we did in this portion of the generic behavior. The only thing is we didn't have to get the component. Generic behavior already knows that if you're changing velocity, it has to access the rigid body, and that happens under the hood. But we're saying we don't know that, so on start, just like you did in generic behavior, let's get the component of the rigid body, and let's set its velocity. So we set its velocity to a new vector that we created, which was 1 on the x, 1 on the y, and then we multiplied that vector by speed. We're going to talk a lot more about vectors later in another lecture because they're very important and you use them a lot. But let's see, I'm going to save this, and did I mess anything up? I'm going to save it, and let's see if it worked. So I have my generic behavior turned off, I believe. Yes, it's turned off. And I have this script, and this is on here. So the ball should move, and it does move. And if I change the speed on this, it's going to move faster. And does it act like the ball? It doesn't act like the ball because the ball that we had in generic behavior, because we didn't do, there's some other things we didn't do, right? So we had these other things that were like on collision enter, right? And so we had this thing called, what did we do? Behavior, vector reflect. So we said we wanted a behavior called vector reflect on this object. And what that did is this allowed this to bounce, right? And so we could do that in script again, but when did we do this? So we did it in collision enter. When this thing hit something, when the ball hit something, that was the event we wanted to do this on. And this doesn't give you it by default. We have to actually write that function in here. But it's very easy. It's a void. It has no return value, so you have void there. And we just type it on collision enter. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. And it does take some parameters. So this is the syntax I was talking about, the knowledge of knowing what this takes. On collision enter takes a collision, and I'm just going to call it other. It's the other thing, the other object that hit this. It tells you the other object that hit this, and it comes into through the parameter list right here. Again, a little advanced. We'll get more into that later, but this creates that event, the same event that was in generic behavior here, which was collision enter. So we're creating that event in script, and we want to do the behavior we want is vector reflect. And so This is a little bit more complex. Uh, because this happens and on collision enter, since we're colliding, it's going to stop it. We need to save the velocity and make sure that we're updating the velocity so we know what the velocity was when it hit this. So I'm going to make a private, meaning it can't be seen in the inspector and no other scripts can see it. I'm going to make a private vector3, and I'm going to call it stored velocity. And in update, I always want this updating. So I'm just going to say stored velocity is equal to RB, because we got the rigid body off of the component here, RB dot velocity. And so I'm saying make a new variable because this is going to be set to 0 when it hits something. So make a new variable and tell me whatever this was all the time. So what I can do there is I can then, I need, when this hits something on collision enter, I need to tell it to reflect. And there's math that already tells you that we can access from this. So if I do RB dot velocity, I want to set the velocity. And I can do that. I want to set it to the new velocity of what it should be when it hits something. I can do vector3 dot reflect. And this is going to reflect the vector of movement along a certain axis. And the axis it does is the surface normal. And we'll go over those, the normal of something, surface normals and normals, when we talk about vectors more often in another lecture. So if I hit Control-Shift-Space, it shows me what does this function wants. It wants the direction in. Well, the direction in is what I was moving when I hit this. So we already got that in stored velocity. And the other thing it wants is a normal. And the surface normal is the direction that the surface was facing. And you can get that. This is another syntax thing, which is a bit more difficult. And you need to learn this to do it. But it would be other. So the other thing that we hit, we're the ball, and say we're hitting the ceiling. This is going to represent the ceiling, the other thing that we hit. Other dot, I think it's contact points, and this is, you can read it right here. It's the contact points generated by the physics engine, meaning these are the points that I hit in here. And this is actually an array, and because you can hit multiple points at the same time. So I'm just going to give it the array syntax, and in here I want normal. I want the normal of the collision. And you don't have to, again, you don't have to know this math completely. You just have to know the pieces to put in, and we'll discuss this a bit more in another lecture. But so now, on collision enter, if this hits something, I'm going to say, well, just reflect along the normal of the vector and set your velocity to that. So if I save this, let's see if it worked. It did. So now you can see that, oh, do I still have the generic behavior on? Maybe it was the generic behavior working. I don't have the generic behavior on. So it is this script that's doing this. And if we compare the two, again, this was on collision enter. This was doing nothing, so I can delete this. We have the movement that we did in start. We set the velocity, and you can see that in here by on start, in this start function, we got the rigid body component. We set the velocity to the direction we wanted to go in, and then we scaled that velocity by the speed we wanted to go by. And then the other thing on here was on collision, an on collision event. And so we made our own on collision event, and we wanted vector reflect in there. There's a few other steps we had to do to get there, but in update we stored the direction we were always moving, and then in our on collision enter function in script, we set the velocity to be the reflected vector of that. And I know that this is kind of mathy and wordy, but you can see that this is the script that you need to mimic the ball behavior in there. So if you wanted to, so I got that on the ball is taken care of. The ball is acting like it should have acted with this generic behavior on it to begin with. So if we look at a paddle now, so the left paddle or the right paddle we were moving, which one were we moving? This has a generic behavior on it. It's not disabled. So you can see that we have an event when input down. So when S was down, we said, all right, set the velocity again. And when S has been pressed once, set the velocity to -1 so it goes down in the amount of 1. And then on key up, when S is let go, set the velocity to 0. And we did that with W also. When W is pressed is up, set the velocity to 0. When W is down, set the velocity to +1 on the Y and the speed so that it works like this, right? We can see the paddle moving slowly. It's moving. So let's get the functionality on this one. So if I did create, I don't want to show an explorer. I want on this, I want to create a new script. So in my script folder, create C# script, and I'm going to call this paddle. And so I just need to get that same functionality. I need to check for input and then set its velocity when I want to do that. And so on, what do I do with that? I'll open this up, reload in here. Here's my paddle script. It looked exactly the same as the other one when I started it because there's no code in it. So it's just a class that was made called paddle. And we can do the same thing if we want to be able to control the speed in Inspector. We can do public float speed. And we'll just set it to 1 to begin with. Semicolon. And so on start, do we want to do anything on start with the paddle? No, because when the game starts, the paddles just kind of sit there, right? What we do want to do is when certain keys are hit, we want to be checking for those keys. And so we want to constantly be checking to see if there's input. And that's something you can do in update. So we're going to use an if statement here. And an if statement, you should know what an if statement is at this point. If you don't, it only runs code if the condition is true inside of it. So I'm going to get input. I'm just going to type input dot get key down, which is very similar to what we did in generic behavior. And get key down takes a key code, and that key code I want is up arrow for this one, because I'm going to be using up arrow for that. So this is saying if the key up arrow has been pressed down, what do I want to do? Well, what I did in generic behavior was I set the velocity of the object. I set the velocity of the object. If I was doing up, I set it to 1 with an amount of speed of 1. So much like I did the ball, I can say, all right, when this happens, what I want you to do is I want you to set, we need to get the rigid body again because we want to set the velocity. So to get the rigid body, we could either just get it manually. I'm just going to do it manually so we get practice getting the components. So I can do game object, right? Because it knows about the game object it's on. Get component, and these two little angle brackets here, that's basically, it's shift, comma, shift period. And in here, I want the rigid body, and that, and it's a function, so it needs its function parentheses at the end, and the velocity variable. And by setting that, setting is equal. So if I'm setting something equal to it, so I'm setting the velocity equal to, and I'm just going to make a new vector 3, and a vector 3 takes x, y, and z in it, and it was 0.0, nothing on the x because I only want this to move up and down, comma 1.0 f, comma 0. I don't want it to move on the x or on the z either. So if up arrow, I want this thing to move up, and I want to scale it by speed also. So I can basically just copy this again. And usually, like I did in the ball, you would catch that and cache it in a variable that's a rigid body type. So I don't have to call this all the time. But I'm explicitly calling this here so you guys get practice seeing it and in knowing that you have to get components, and this is the way you get components. And I can do the same thing here. I can actually just do times equals speed. Is the same as doing velocity, all this velocity equals velocity times speed. You can do times equals speed there also. So if I put this script on here, I'm going to save it. It's going to let me save it. Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to save this, and if I go to my right paddle, which has no generic behavior on it, right? It doesn't have anything on it. I can't move it. if I add this script under scripts, and it's paddle that I just made. So I have a paddle with a speed of 1, and that paddle just says, if I hit the up arrow, this thing should go up. Totally doesn't. So I did something wrong here. Right paddle and speed. Let's see. If get key down, key up arrow. There's something wrong here, right? And you should have caught me on it, but you didn't. I'm setting the velocity of this object, right? But when we have to add a component to know about velocity that this doesn't have. The left paddle has a rigid body, but the right paddle, we never added that rigid body here. So it doesn't know about velocity at all. So we have to add a rigid body on here. And I don't want to use gravity on it, and I don't want it to be able to move on the X and the Z, and I never want it to rotate. It can only go up and down. That's the only thing this thing can do. So now if I hit the up arrow, you'll see that that thing moves very slowly up. And it doesn't stop either, because I don't have any code to make it stop. So I'm going to make that 2, so it's a little bit faster. So if I just tap up arrow once, it'll continue to go up forever because I'm setting that velocity like that. So what I can do with that to get it to stop, I can do something like this. If that's not down, I can do else if, and I can say input dot get key up. This means when it comes up, and the key I want to look for again is key code. That's not a function, I'm sorry. Key code dot up arrow. So that means when this is let go, when the up arrow is let go, what do I want to do? And what I want to do is I just want to set the velocity to 0. So I can grab this game, we're going to type it out again so you get practice with a game object dot get component, little caret things, rigid body dot velocity equals, and we can cheat here by saying vector 3. It already has a nice 0 out vector for us, vector 3 dot 0. And so now when I go in here and if I let go of the up arrow, it should stop, which it does. And I could do all the same thing to get the down arrow stuff. If I do the same thing, copy all of this, I just select it all, Control C, enter, enter, Control V, and if I just put down arrow in here, I need to put down arrow dot down arrow dot down arrow, and this is -1. This is where I want this to move now. Control S to save, and I should be able to move down now. And I can. So this is the exact functionality you saw on this paddle, has its generic behavior that does those same things. And then this paddle has a script on it that does the same things. If up arrow is pressed down, set the velocity. If it's let up, set the velocity to 0. We can scale it by speed if we want to and change the speed of this. And that's how we would script that. So you can see the problem solving is very similar. So the problem in doing it in script is you just have to know these words to put in here to get this done. And so there was still the goal, and there's still a lot of other things that you can do with this. We could get the score working. I guess we could do a goal. So the left goal has nothing on it. The right goal has this generic behavior on it, and it has on collision enter. It has when you're colliding, it has a bunch of events that it was calling. But we can do the same thing. We can make a goal script. Goal. And if I open this script, so we want to do this only when the ball hits this also. So we had an on collision enter with the ball. We're also going to need an on collision enter with this. So if we just did void on collision, I need to capitalize that. If I wouldn't have capitalized that, it would have been bad. Enter. And it takes a few things. It takes a collision, this is the other thing that hit me. So the only thing we really care about that hits us for the goal is the ball, right? So if other dot name, we need to do other dot collider dot name is equal to ball, that means the ball hit us. And what we wanted to do with that was, before, the easiest thing to do was we set its position back to to 0, 0, 0, 0. So we could do other dot transform, the transform of the other object, dot position equals vector 3 dot 0, because I know it's at 0 because I put it there when I did that. So now this other goal here, when it comes back the other way, I didn't put the script on this, so it's not going to do anything. But the left goal now, if I add this script to it, goal script, so it has a goal script on it. It should reset this. It did not reset it. Let's see what happened with that. Maybe because the others, the ball isn't named ball. It is named ball. Let's just see what happens when I take this out. Let's see if that works. And so this one works with generic behavior. And that did reset it. You could see that it reset the position of that. It just must not have liked the name of that object when doing that. So checking for the name. There's other things I could check for tag. Ball should have worked because the name is ball of this object. I don't know why it didn't work, but in that situation, I know the only thing that's going to be hitting it is the ball because nothing else can hit that trigger or hit that object there. So that resets the ball, and realistically, that's as easy it is for resetting the ball, just setting the transform dot position. Same thing that we did in generic behavior on this goal. On collision, we had a ball reset. We set the position to 0, 0, 0 on the ball object. So the only other thing was score, and so I can't. This was a special object for generic behavior. This score digit right here. So I can create. There's other stuff that I can do to get a score in here. I can create something called a canvas, and I didn't want it to be there. I want it to just be out. It's not supposed to be this thing. And the canvas is this big thing that they see, this big thing right here that comes way out here. This is always going to be on the screen, so this is like your HUD. And I can access these variables in a few different ways. I can get access to the canvas, but what I want to add to the canvas is text. So I'm going to add some text to here, and you'll see that that's my little text piece that I added to it. And I could control the text in here. I'm just going to set this to 0 because I want it to be a score. I'm going to set the size to like 50. And I'm probably going to have to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. Yeah, that's fine. And I'm going to center it, and I'm going to put it in a place, and I'm going to make it white with the color here so it matches the other one. So if I play now, there's the score for this guy right here. It doesn't do anything yet, but I can change that. And so the way I can change that is in my goal script. When I hit this, I can get access to the text. I actually have to do something here. Again, more syntax and understanding some things. Unity engine dot UI. I need access to, it needs to know about UI things. So in here I can make a public text type variable because I'm going to put text in there. And I'm going to call it my score text. And I can access that text. If I put this script, if I would have saved this, Control S, I can go to my left goal. I think I had that on. And there it is. It became visible in the inspector because I made it public. So if it wants a text type, see, it wants the type text. So if I just drag this text, if I select the left goal again and just drag this text into there, I'm now going to have access to that right in there. So I can change that now if I want to. It is text, so it's a string, but I have access to it. So if I wanted to change this, I don't want to just reset the position. I also want to change the text when this happens, right? And so I can do my score text, which is that text object I just drug in there. And it's not, it still has a text portion to it. A text is a type of thing. So I need to do the text, my score text dot text equals, and I could set this to some other string here if I wanted to. Script. And I know that's not a number because this isn't a number. But as soon as I start this, if it hits this other object here, that 0 should turn into script. And it might be cut off because the box isn't big enough to actually show it. But there it is, script, it turned to script. And so we don't know it's a number yet. We actually want this to be a number. But so we don't have a stored goal for this. So we need to make an integer, private integer, score, not score text, but the actual score that we're going to check against is 0, right? And when this hits, before we draw that, we're going to add 1 to 0 when it hits that goal, right? So we can do score. We can do a couple things. We can do plus equals 1 would work. We can do score equals score plus 1. That would work. Or we could do score plus plus, and that's all different types of ways to do that. They all do the same thing. We'll just do score plus equals 1 and leave those commented out. And then instead of this, instead of putting an actual string here, we're just going to do score, but score is an int, so this is a text, this is a string, so it won't know how to actually do that. So we have to actually make that toString, which is a function. And as we did that, then you'll see that it's going to start adding the score up, and it'll work very similar to the generic behavior one in there. And we did the same thing in so that went to 1 now also. So we're keeping track of the score in this goal just like we are in generic behavior. This other left goal, the right goal. The other events we had on here was score set. So we set the score and value storage of this single digit thing, this little single digit thing. We actually set its score in this event. And then we changed the scene when we checked. We have this load scene thing. So we said load sing pong, and we did a comparison somewhere here. Score set, that set, reset all, compare store. So we did a comparison here and said load pong when we got to a certain score that we wanted to. So you can do the same thing in here, which was you just check to see if score. We said 2 before, so if when it hits this thing, if score is greater than 1, meaning it was 2, or we could say equal to 2, whatever, double equal 1. So we just want to see if it hits once. then we can say, all right, if you did that, we can just say, I think it's in scene load. I forget the function for loading scene here. Object dot load scene. Where is not find object? I forget what the function name is for that. I thought it is load scene. I just don't know what. To the Google. Unity load scene. Yes. Scene management. Scene management. Okay. If I get that scene. Can't get scene management. What do I have to add for that? I guess we could do application load level. Let's try that. Application dot load level. And the level I want to load is, I think I called it Pong, like that. It doesn't like something about that. Use scene manager dot load scene. I tried doing that. We'll see if it likes it. Probably didn't save it. Move this down. And it did it. You see how it reset the scores and it reloaded the scene when that happened? So it did the same thing. And so that is, those pieces are all the same pieces you would need to do Pong in script. Instead of generic behavior, we just did a pawl, a paddle, and a goal to get all the logic that we wanted to for that. And you can see they're very similar. We're solving the same problems, and there's a little bit of a learning curve to both of them. Both of them have their learning curve, but we just need to know some words and some syntax to actually use this. So